Well, it's painfully obvious to everyone that the Tsarnaeva brothers were part of a larger conspiracy. Even W used the C word.
There might have been a organized plot, but I was deeply concerned that this could have been, another organized, highly organized attack on the country.
But C doesn't just stand for conspiracy. It also stands for CIA. And the CIA has their fingerprints all over the Boston Marathon bombing. Now, when it first happened, we were very concerned because it was being used to forward a domestic agenda of a police state. Immediately, we were told that it was right-wing terrorists. We were told that it was a new 9/11. And immediately, we at InfoWars were looking for signs of previous false flag terrorist attacks. In other words, a bomb drill, something that is taking place that is exactly the way the attack was, at exactly the same time, exactly the same place. And that's why we shut down the press conference, because they didn't want to answer Dan Bidondi's direct question about was there a bomb drill going on there. So clearly, this wasn't just a crime. And we've had people criticize us because they want to fall into the official narrative, and it's somehow unpatriotic to look to see if justice is being done. Well, you know, justice means not only that you don't frame the wrong people for something, but it also means that the guilty are found and prosecuted. And that means all of the guilty, not just a couple of people. If they were involved in the bombing, we want to know who was behind them. And it's more than just a mysterious Uncle Misha. There's a much larger context here. Not only is there an agenda to create a domestic police state, there's also an international agenda, perhaps, that may have some kind of a deal being worked in the background for the U.S. to have clearance to go after Syria, while Russia has clearance to go after some Muslim terrorists in Chechnya. And here to give us a broader background on that is Sibel Edmonds. Now, Sibel Edmonds is a former FBI translator and whistleblower. She had some key evidence in the September 11th terrorist attacks, and she was put under a gag order by some judges and what she could say about it. But she did put out some key intelligence information that is linked to developing current events about who was behind the Tsarnaeva brothers, who was directing them. Joining us now is Sibel Edmonds. Sibel, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me back.
I want to talk about Gladio Part B. You've got a long series on boilingfrogspost.com about that. But I want to get first to the breaking news about Uncle Ruslan. It's all over the news today, and this weekend there's information breaking about Uncle Ruslan. What can you tell us about his connections to this guy, Graham Fuller, the CIA, his father-in-law? Tell us a little bit of information about Graham Fuller. You've known about him for quite some time, and you've got a lot of information on Graham Fuller.
Sure. Well, as we know, the infamous uncle, has been very vocal in putting and packaging this message together on the radicalization of the Boston terror suspects. He has been key. He has been featured extensively and intensively, in all the mainstream media, CNN, nonstop, of course.
Exactly.
CBS.
I thought it was very interesting that I'm sorry to interrupt you, but they talked to his mother, his father, his aunt. They're immediately saying that he's set up. We get interviews from some people who knew the younger brother, said he wasn't really kind of a hateful guy. He was a real normal Western kind of guy. But then Uncle Ruslan comes on, and he's the only story that gets out there. You just hear him over and over again. He throws basically his nephews under the bus and says these guys were, lonesome. They were radicalized. They were hate-filled loners who had no friends. All sort of But I'm sorry. So this is Uncle Ruslan. Tell us about Uncle Ruslan's connections with the CIA.
Well, right there, at that point, people should have asked themselves, why is it that the mainstream media and the quasi-alternatives keep playing this guy? Where did he pop out from? This is really interesting, right? And this is around the time that nobody was talking about the CIA, and I put the analysis out there. We produced the video. This is about a week, 10 days ago, talking about that nobody's mentioning the CIA. Everybody's putting the focus, the spotlight on the FBI. Well, as we started preparing that, lo and behold, the news came out that the brothers, the suspects, were attending Jamestown Foundation conference overseas, over there, in that part of the world. And Jamestown Foundation is the extension of, it's very closely related related to the CIA. And of course, the mainstream media did not at all cover this angle. And then about a couple of days later, thanks to the real alternative media sources, the news came out that the infamous uncle, mainstream media's darling, Washington Post and New York Times darling guy, happened to be he was married to a very infamous, a very shady CIA operative. His name is Graham Fuller, and I'm going to get into Graham Fuller in a second. So this man, the uncle of the Boston terror suspects, he was married to one of the top CIA operatives in that region, Central Asia and Caucasus, Graham Fuller. Not only that, in 1990s, this guy, this uncle, he lived with the CIA guy in his house in Maryland for almost 1 year, okay?
Yeah.
This news came out and nobody covered it, and a couple of quasi-alternatives, they put a spin on it, and they said, because they interviewed this guy, this infamous guy, Graham Fuller, and Graham Fuller said, well, yes, he was married to my daughter, but it's ridiculous for people to link anything of, any of this to the CIA. Well, of course, this alternative, quasi-alternative, they put a spin on the story, they twisted it, and the headline said, Graham Fuller denies any connection to the CIA. If you go and read the article, Graham Fuller confirms that, yes, he was this man's father-in-law. And then again, we will talk about Graham Fuller in a second. So this came out, and also the fact that the uncle was working for USAID, which anybody who's awake knows that, again, is another operation field for the CIA when they want to get into some country, and they always put some of their people together with USAID. USAID and CIA, they have this joint partnership. Okay, let's put it that way. So again, about 10 days after we put the analysis on CIA, emphasize that fact, now all this information is coming out only through the alternative media. These are supported, documented. Even Graham Fuller, the CIA operative, is saying, yes, I was his father-in-law. I mean, this is really big. I mean, when people put these pieces together, how this uncle was played, okay, how he was placed under this intense spotlight, okay, how he became the darling, the representative, and he's the first source talking about the suspect's radicalization. As you know, before that, I mean, the people, these suspects' friends from Boston, they're saying they were very modern, going to nightclubs, hanging out in expensive Beamers. They were hanging out with Turks. They were not hanging out with the radicals. Then, bam, their biological uncle comes and he says that. Well, of course, naive people would right away say, here, even their uncle says they were radical Muslims, so that must be true. And of course, MSM played it. On the other hand, when these connections are pouring out, again, thanks to the real alternative media outlets, there is nothing. You don't see anything in the mainstream media. And this is why, from the beginning, from weeks ago, we started pounding the fact that the MO here, with everything that we see on the ground, and considering the region, Chechnya, the Central Asia Caucasus region, this carries CIA's MO, not the FBI's. And we presented the both background and context of why the CIA MO and why CIA connection here.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because it's pretty obvious when you look at the lifestyle of these guys. Like you mentioned, they've got expensive sports cars, even though the family is largely on welfare here. So obviously they're getting money from some extra source, okay? Whether it's Islamic terrorists or whether it's the CIA, it's obviously they're not lone wolf guys, right? But you've got the uncle, as you just pointed out, someone who has had a history of working for a CIA front corporation in the area, and then you've got him married to the daughter of the CIA's top guy in the area. I mean, he wasn't just CIA. Graham Fuller was very high in the CIA, and that was his area of specialty, was right there in that area.
Absolutely, David. You aced it there, because, you see, people can't say, well, here it is, Sibel Edmonds coming and talking about Graham Fuller and saying she now knew about this guy. If they go to my document website where my case is totally narrated, to justicecitizen.com, and if they click on State Secrets Privilege Gallery, they will see a list of names of top individuals with their pictures there. Okay, actually, they will see the pictures, and then later they will get to articles that name these individuals. Because of the gag orders, because of the state secrets privilege, in 2007, I put this gallery of these more than a dozen individuals as the key players and the key FBI targets, the key FBI investigations targets between 1996 and 2002, to give people the clue about why the state secrets privilege, why all the gag orders, which all had to do with United States through CIA and also to a certain degree NATO, creating, training, arming, radicalizing the Islamic factions in Central Asia and Caucasus, which also tied to 9/11 because as part of these operations in Central Asia and Caucasus, we continued working with bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri. We're not talking about 80s Mujahideen in Afghanistan. We are talking about mid-1990s all the way till 2002, February 2002, which actually covers a certain period of time post 9/11, okay?
Right, and you figure very prominently in the 9/11 investigations because you were working as an FBI translator at the time. You came across some key intelligence. You had gags put on you, and this is what you were saying when you were on the radio on Friday. You said over and over again in the FBI, you guys would intercept intelligence, and somebody from the CIA or the State Department would come in and basically shut it up. And the key part of this is that, as you said, the narrative is often told that, hey, 9/11 happened because of blowback. 9/11 happened because we interjected ourselves in a very ham-fisted, clumsy way into foreign countries' internal affairs, and we wind up interjecting ourselves into every war. We wind up making enemies out of both sides, and they come back and they pull some stunt like this. But what you were seeing was people who were actually being run by the CIA and the State Department as a front group. And when somebody like Rachel Maddow says that we think that Obama is the global head of Al-Qaeda, it's like, yeah, I'll go with that. I mean,
correct. And I want to also make this point that I worked for the FBI 2 days, 3 days after 9/11. However, I worked with several FBI field offices, not only with Washington field offices, but my main area had to do with Turkish and Turkic countries. Turkic countries refer to Central Asia and Caucasus, okay? They speak variation of Turkish language. My major field with the FBI had to do with this investigation that FBI started in 1996. Mm-hmm. So some of the stuff that I was looking, translating, analyzing, going back, getting verbatim translations on, some of those occurred in 1997, 1998, 1999, and we also had real time, and this is right after September 11, on this particular investigation that George Bush shut down in February 2002.
And just to clarify, let me clarify before we go any further, your area of specialty was the Turkish area and the Caucasus, and that's exactly what we're talking about with Chechnya. That is the Caucasus region of Russia. So that, you know, where this is all going back to right now with this, with the Tsarnaeva brothers and everyone, that is exactly the area of specialty where you were translating documents back in the mid-90s.
Correct. And these documents originated from the investigations which started around end of 1996. Mm-hmm. So basically, these operations for FBI, and this is domestic counterintelligence, the targets were not only foreign. The targets were also U.S. individuals, some of them in Congress, many of them within the State Department, some of them undercover CIA operatives in that region. They were also operating here in the United States. And again, we will get to that when we talk about Imam Fethullah Gulen, and when I start talking about Graham Fuller. Graham Fuller was a CIA operative that was part of this Operation Gladio in Turkey, Central Asia, and Caucasus. And in mid-1990s, he was a key figure in CIA's radicalization and training, arming, and also carrying out some of the biggest terror attacks within the borders of Russia in that region. So he is, we will talk about him, and we will get into that, and we will also talk about Gulen.
Mm-hmm. Now, exactly. When we get into, let's start talking about Operation Gladio Part B. Give us some of us know, and Darren McBreen did a great report with a fellow who wrote a book about Gladio. Now he's a British fellow now living in Italy. And it's very well known in Italy because in the 70s, there was a wave of terror. Aldo Moro, the Italian prime minister, was killed. You had everybody that was alive at that time was hearing stuff about the Red Brigade this, the Red Brigade that. As time went on, it was revealed that these really were false flag operations because the communists were gaining politically in the area, and it was actually NATO running false flag operations and blaming it on the communists. And of course, then we were told that Operation Gladio had been shut down. But you have some other information about that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The information you just provided, absolutely. And this is a documented, I mean, even now declassified documents from Italy, and even here in the United States says, yes, we did that. We and NATO, we carried out these false flag operations. However, they say that these operations ended with the fall of the Soviet Union, okay? So end of 1980s, 1991, it was dismantled. That is the official narrative. It is not correct. While the cells that carried out false flag operations and terror attacks, okay, in most part of Europe, they shut down, and that includes Italy. They left, and this is the CIA and NATO, they left one major cell open and untouched, and that is the cell in Turkey. And again, if people, they go and look at the history of Turkey and Operation Gladio, they will see that Turkey was a prominent player. Turkey is a NATO member, yes.
Oh, yes.
And, okay. Well, they did not shut down that particular cell because of the incredible importance, significance of this area, Central Asia, Caucasus. Look at Turkey, Muslim country. These Central Asian countries, these Caucasus regions, they are Muslim. Turkey, they speak Turkish. Well, 90% plus of this region, Central Asia, Caucasus, they speak Turkish languages, okay? Different dialects of Turkish languages. Also, you're looking at shared heritage. So the great game was we keep alive and intensify one cell, we shut down the rest, and that cell was the Turkish cell in order to go, and this is against, number one, Russia, but the region also included the region in China that is referred to as Xinjiang, Uyghuristan, East Turkestan. These are various names people refer to that area. Within China territory, this area, they are Turkic, they are Turkish people, they are Muslims, that's why they call them Turkestan, that's the other name for it. So with this cell, NATO and CIA, they pinpointed various small Islamic factions. This is right after the fall of the Soviet Union, okay? Chechnya, people, faction in Azerbaijan, in Kyrgyzstan. And they started recruiting and radicalizing them in order to use them against Russia. Okay, so this started in mid-1990s, and it is still Operation Gladio. In FBI, the investigation, FBI named it as Operation Gladio Plan B. Now, another name can be the Phase 2, Operation Gladio Phase 2. And if you look at least I can tell you this much, until 2002, the biggest terrorist attacks that occurred within Russian soil, okay, coming from individuals from Dagestan or Chechnya, they were completely directed, armed, and orchestrated by NATO and the United States, CIA. And this is, I'm talking about every single major attacks up until 2002. I've been out of the FBI since April, May 2002. So until at least that point, and this is still after 9/11, okay? This is not before 9/11. That's what we were doing. And one of the individuals involved in this, in orchestrating, one of the main operatives with this was Mr. Graham Fuller. And Graham Fuller, CIA operative who was stationed in Turkey, but again, his main task, he was part of the team from the CIA that worked with NATO in pinpointing, training, arming, radicalizing these factions in Central Asia and Caucasus, and bringing about, these terror incidents in the region.
Now, back in January, on your website, boilingfrogspost.com, you recorded a 4-hour series on Operation Gladio Part B with Steve Corbett. everybody really needs to see that. It's really fascinating. It's an amazing story. Anybody that likes a good spy novel, you know, truth is much stranger than fiction. And there's a lot of information there, but I want to play this brief clip where you talk about Operation Gladio Part B.
The Turkish paramilitary Gladio operations in those countries. Overseeing these thugs and these operations, these false terror, false flag operations, not only in Turkey, Central Asia, Caucasus, you know, a lot of Chechen operations.
Now, again, going to the narrative that this isn't just blowback from angry Muslims, but it's a larger, more calculated plot. Let's talk about this Imam Gulen, because I think that's really key. When we see how this guy fit into Turkey and we see how he's brought back and used by the CIA, it really does kind of put the lie to this whole thing that this is radicalized Muslims that are blowing back against our foreign policy. Tell us a little bit about Imam Gulen.
Yes, Imam Fethullah Gulen, up until 1996, 1997, he was this radical Islamic preacher, okay, and not really high-level guy. This guy doesn't even have elementary-level education. He was kicked out of school by 4th grade, so he didn't even get high school diploma. He was your typical preacher who would basically preach Sharia laws and talk about why secular government in Turkey was not right for an Islamic Muslim nation, that it should be thrown out, and people should, you know, have revolution and replace the government. And this is the Kemalist Atatürk government put in place since the early 1990s in Turkey, and replace it with Sharia laws, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, initially, the Turkish government didn't take this guy very seriously. As I said, he was like a low-level guy. But he started actually creating a semi-significant movement in Turkey by actually getting some money, raising some money, and establishing some small madrasas in Turkey, and send kids to the, you know, to the poor children who couldn't attend regular schools, or poor children who came from a more radical Islamic background could attend, okay? Now, in 1996, Operation Gladio, and this is right now in Turkey, we are talking about Turkey, they decided that what was happening in Turkey with some of their factions within Gladio, they had to be kicked out and they had to disappear. So we have a major scandal taking place in Turkey in 1996, early 1997, referred to as a major, this is like a Watergate scandal in the United States, called Susurluk, okay? Mm-hmm. And during this time, the Operation Gladio operatives, and this is NATO and US, they decided that this guy, Fethullah Gulen, would be fantastic as one of the fronts in operations in Central Asia and Caucasus, okay, because they saw that he was being a bit successful in Turkey. Meanwhile, the Turkish government, and this is the secular military regime in Turkey, they indicted this guy, Fethullah Gulen, this mullah, this imam, because of his radical views and his advocacy of this Sharia law, and they wanted to sentence him to 10 years in jail, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, what happens is, during this time, while he's under this indictment, lo and behold, Imam Gulen, inside the Gulf Stream, takes off from Turkey, okay, and lands here in Washington, D.C., United States. So in 1998, they set him up. In a Gulf Stream
jet that's owned by the CIA, right?
That is one of the documents and the facts that came out during Susurluk and after Susurluk investigations. Of course, mainstream media did not cover it. In fact, mainstream media in the U.S. didn't cover any of this because Fethullah Gulen, this mullah, this radical Sharia guy, was our guy, okay? And we needed him for the operations. So he came to Washington, D.C. He was given this temporary visa. He was given a lavish house, okay? And he set up this NGO in the United States, this Islamic NGO, in 1998, and started raising hundreds of millions of dollars in the United States. Now, again, think about what I've been telling you about FBI and our investigations, because these operations in Central Asia, Caucasus, had actors here in the United States. And that included Mr. Gulen, Fethullah Gulen, Imam Gulen, and also his handlers, CIA handlers. And his main handler for Fethullah Gulen, Imam Gulen's main handler was no other than Graham Fuller of the CIA. Because he's supposed to be expert in Islam, and with all the time he spent, of course, in Turkey and leading some of the terror operations in Central Asia, Caucasus, he was Fethullah Gulen's handler. People, and this is a parenthesis here, people will say, what proof do you have for this? Well, the Department of Homeland Security, they wanted to kick out this guy, Imam Gulen, in mid-2000, 2005, 2006. They said he expired his visa and we want to kick him out. And also he has some suspicious activities and, of course, FBI investigations of Fethullah Gulen, right? Guess who stepped in at this point? And people can go online, go to Google, okay, or you can go to my website, boilingfrogspost.com, and
Let me guess. Was it Graham Fuller?
He was one of the handful of neocons and CIA operatives. Graham Fuller went further. He actually testified. He put a letter saying that U.S. should value this guy. He was one of our most important Islamic, moderate Islam partner in et cetera, et cetera. So this is all documented. You can see Graham Fuller's name. You can see his letters on behalf of Fethullah Gulen. And another individual, for example, who sponsored, and he also is named in these court documents that people can see, is Mort Abramowitz, okay? So basically, if you look at Gulen's sponsors, you are looking at people like Mort Abramowitz, Graham Fuller, you're looking at Richard Pearl. You see basically a lot of PNAC guys. Well, the same guys were also the top players in one way or another with the Operation Gladio Phase 2, okay? So I'm going to go back to Gulen getting here, setting this NGO. Between 1998, while he's in U.S., while his NGO is operating here with hundreds of millions of dollars, Fethullah Gulen opens over 350 madrasas. These are radical Islamic schools and mosques in Central Asia and Caucasus, okay? While he's living here in U.S., through his NGO in the United States. Okay?
Yeah.
And this between the period 1998 till 2005. Again, this is documented. In fact, some of the more, I guess, Russian allies in terms of Central Asian countries, they kicked out and they banned this man's radical madrasas and mosques. Okay? And again, this guy's handlers happen to be Mort Abramowitz, Graham Fuller. Okay? And right now, currently in the United States, Fethullah Gulen, Imam Gulen's NGO, is worth more than $20 billion.
Wow.
Nobody knows where the money is coming from, okay? Nobody. There has been, and again, people can find some European publications, mainstream European publications. In Holland, currently in Netherlands, for the past 3 years, Fethullah Gulen movements have been under investigations because they have some network in Holland as well, okay? They were kicked out of Russia. Russia banned their schools. They had it in Russian territory, okay? So again, this is public information. This man has been living in the United States since 1998 with operations that we are carrying out, radicalizing, Islamicizing, factions within Caucasus and Central Asia, okay? His handler, even the U.S. court documents show, happened to be the same CIA guys now that we see connection with the Boston terror. The Boston terror suspects happen to have ties with Chechnya and this region, Central Asia and Caucasus. This is why from the beginning, from the initial terror incident stage, I kept telling and putting this analysis out there about CIA's MO. Well, now we have Graham Fuller fact coming out. Mainstream media won't be covering it, David, because they won't. Because guess what? I mean, these people, including the State Department, they dictate what New York Times prints, okay?
Oh, the ridiculous thing that you're seeing today, what's breaking all over CNN and all the mainstream media, is the search for Misha, okay? First we're told that these are lone wolf terrorists, and of course that doesn't really jive with anything. There's so many holes in that story. So now they've got to find the lone wolf radicalizer, Misha, some fictional character. And I guess this is the guy that supplied the brothers with the sports cars as well as radicalization. But this just broke in a story that Plotnikov, the guy that basically tied them to Misha, he's no longer alive. So you got the stream of dead bodies that are supposedly the people who are turning this in. But what you said, I want to just repeat what you said here, which is really key, because again, we're told over and over again that 9/11 was blowback from bad foreign policy. But what you saw in the 90s is this guy, Imam Gulen, who is brought to who's basically under indictment in Turkey for being too radical. He's flown to the U.S. in a CIA Learjet, and then this very guy, Graham Fuller, who is the father-in-law of Uncle Ruslan, okay, gives this guy cover and protection when Homeland Security and the FBI want to deport him because they know he's radical. Meanwhile, he turns up, this guy with a fourth-grade education now has $20 billion worth of net worth here in the U.S., and he's somehow able to fund over 350 radical madrasas throughout Europe and the Islamic countries, and he's never left the U.S. I mean, he's all...
No, he hasn't set foot outside the United States. His entire financial centers, his entire headquarters, he has right now, he has one major NGOs and several fork NGOs under that NGOs. His financial centers is in Chicago. He resides in Pennsylvania. And again, this is public information. People can go and put net worth Fethullah Gulen NGO United States, and they will see, and this, it says $20+ billion, okay?
Right.
And nobody knows how this money happens to be within this NGO. And this is one of the main ways CIA launders clean up their operations, like the ones involving heroin. That money needs to be laundered, okay? Financial institutions, some of them are in this business with the CIA. But another way is having NGOs like this, because nobody's questioning this NGO that is right now posing, and if you go and look at the mainstream media articles in the United States, they call him a moderate Islamist. You go to the rest of European countries and in Russia and in Central Asia, he's known as a major radical terrorist Islamist, okay? So how they launder this money is also through NGOs like this, because to this date, nobody can source this money. He says, this is Fethullah Gulen, he says these are donations from people in Turkey who really love his work. Turkish government can't even raise that much money in tax, okay?
Right,
and this guy says he's $20 billion a year.
Right.
Net worth of foundation is coming through Turkish voluntary donations, and people should just, right now, things should be clicking in people's heads.
Yeah, exactly. But $20 billion is chicken feed when you're looking at the international drug trade that's coming out of Afghanistan that they're running there. And it went from like only 10% to like 90% of the world's trade, and heroin and cocaine and that sort of thing. So it's almost kind of like, I look at this, it's almost like the slave trade that we had. You know, the British had this sweet deal going where they would pick up the slaves in one area, they would drop them off, then pick up the sugar cane and go to this place. We got the CIA goes to Afghanistan. They get all this drug money. They can then use that to fund all these black ops. Then they can set up and run these madrasas everywhere, and then use that as justification to scare us into surrendering our civil liberties. And then, as we talked about on Friday, it's not even just a domestic agenda that's there, but there's also this international agenda that perhaps they're putting some pressure on the Russians, or making a deal with the Russians so that if the Russians support this, that they can then say, all right, we'll give you some, we'll give on this area, and you guys can kind of back off on, your opposition to the war in Syria, and we'll kind of give you ethical cover for going against these now radical Chechens. Here we are. No Americans have ever heard of anything going on in Chechnya, although there's been a lot of strife with the Russians. And so now we'll back off. We won't criticize you if you go against the Chechens, but maybe you can kind of back off and not oppose us in Syria.
Absolutely. Excellent points you made. Several excellent points you made, David. And see, with Russia, that's one of the things that people, when they, especially people who are not familiar with all the geopolitics, they just look at the surface, the face value of, okay, everything that goes on, let's say, between Russia and the United States, or Central Asia, Caucasus and Russia. They have to look at it broadly, and they have to also get into the context and the history of the area and what has been taking place not only in the past few weeks, but for the last couple of decades. That's when you start getting a bigger picture. For example, that's a possibility. I'm very careful to emphasize when I say hypothesis, okay? I don't even say theory, because hypothesis is a possibility that the upcoming events and also what we have from the past can come together, may prove it accurate or not. But one of the other areas that there may be an agreement between the United States and Russia is the bigger apple there, okay? And that is Iran, because Syria, who is more important for Russia, Syria or Iran? As part of this, I mean, we just had this WMD a la Iraq popping up with Syria now.
Right.
And things are getting really heated. And again, my prediction, my hypothesis that what is going to happen there is going to happen and be done in the next 2 weeks. And again, goes with the entire timeline with this Boston terror incident and what's happening between Russia and the United States and the backdoor deals. And another agreement may be that we will be basically hands off for a while with Iran, both in terms of some of the sanctions and some of the stuff that have been kind of intensifying, brewing in the background. So another thing I won't be surprised about would be the rhetoric on Iran may get milder, because that's one place that Russia would not compromise. Syria is a different deal, but with Iran, that may be part of the agreement, that you won't be seeing anything really big, major escalation with Iran for at least another year or two, and Russia would be happy with that. And with the WMD a la Iraq, it's very interesting, because right now Russia says, well, we need to be part of this inspection team. And if we find out, because Geneva Convention holds, and if we find out that there's been any use, then okay, U.S., then you have free hands to do this. On the other hand, we are hearing from the Syrian government that says, well, the Al-Qaeda there, our Al-Qaeda, United States Al-Qaeda,
right,
and these terror rebel groups, they are the ones who've been using the WMDs against our soldiers and against people. Now, think about it. We give these chemicals to our rebels, and we have already said, yes, they're under us. We have been funding, arming, managing them either directly or through our allies within the Gulf region, through Dubai, through Qatar, through Jordan. And sure, we can supply them, which we have already done so with some chemical weapons, have them use it on the ground, send the inspectors, consent and say, fine, Russians can be part of the team. And lo and behold, they're going to say, here it is. This is the amount used, and these are the chemical weapons that shows present, and just blame it on Syrian government. I'm just bringing a scenario that is highly likely. And at this stage, Russia is going to be able to save face and say, you know what? After all, Geneva Convention overrides everything else. The report says there is a presence of chemical weapons, okay? And U.S. and all the intelligence agencies says it was Assad. Nobody's broadcasting Assad's government's reports on saying that the rebels have been, the terrorists have been using this. And go ahead, U.S., and go ahead, the international community, and within a couple of days, Assad will be gone. So that is, again, that is my hypothesis. That's the prediction that I'm leaning towards, saying this is the likely scenario that we will be seeing, giving Russia also the opportunity to save face.
Wow, that's very interesting. Great analysis. And I've got to say, people have to go to boilingfrogspost.com and take a look at this Gladio B series that you've got there. I've watched only the first hour of it, but it is really packed with information. It puts all these current events in context. It shows the CIA fingerprints are all over this. But more importantly, when we saw the Soviet Union go down in 1989, the military-industrial complex in the United States no longer had a credible enemy that they could use to continue to build and to buy stuff, right? At that point, everybody was saying, how are we going to spend this peace dividend? How are we going to, that's great, because now we've won, now we don't have to spend so much on the military. That got the military-industrial complex very concerned, and if we go back and you look at Gladio B lays this all out, how the CIA went in and funded the new opposition, which could not only replace Russia, but could be something that was far bigger, something that would give them a domestic military police state industrial complex. I mean, this is big. The war on terror is something that was going to deliver for them, something the Cold War could never deliver, and that is an attack on Americans constant surveillance, constant militarization, and when you look at the way the military is turning inward now in the United States, you can see where the military-industrial complex is headed on this, and it's really important for everybody to understand what was going on in the 1990s in between the fall of the Soviet Union in '89 and September 11th in 2009, and your series really lays that out. Thank you, Sibel, for joining us today.
Thank you. Anytime, David. My pleasure. And thank you for providing the opportunity to put this information out. You're one of very, very, very few alternatives that does that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, the CIA's fingerprints are all over the Boston Marathon bombing, and we're going to follow that story wherever it leads. So stay tuned to Prison Planet TV. If you're watching on YouTube, try a subscription to support our operation.